when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah.
Thanks so much, Janelle. So what's the worst idea you've ever had? I realize that can strike right at a lot of pain, and it's not my intention. I'm looking for those. Sarah Anderson one of her mottos used to be, if we can laugh at it later, we can laugh at it now. I'm looking at those types of ideas. This summer, my family and I, speaking of bad ideas, I think it was late July, we decided that we wanted to go to Hood River and do some riding, all 5 of us, and so we went to Hood River and did some riding, which was awesome, by the way. I highly recommend it. And we decided before we left that on the way back, I like minor league baseball and baseball in general, and I always really enjoy going to minor league stadiums that you've never seen before. And the Spokane Indians, I think it's a Class A team, are in Spokane, actually in the Spokane Valley. So I was like, hey, let's on the way back, let's stop, just as we're ending the day, catch a game, check into a cheap hotel, and then head home. And so one of the ideas was, I want to rent one of those motel things where you can just wheel your bikes right in the front door, because a group of us for spring break went down to Fruita, and we stayed in Salt Lake on the way down, and we stayed in like the 4th floor of the Holiday Inn Express, which was a great hotel and a great experience. The only problem was we didn't really think about the fact that we had like 10 bikes that we had to get to the 4th floor of the Holiday Inn. So it was kind of a freak show, because here we were like taking up the elevator, and there was like 2 elevators, and it was kind of a disaster, and especially for an introvert. So I was like, this time, let's just stay like in a cheap motel where you just kind of wheel your bikes right in. And so I was searching around online, and bam, I found this one just like a mile away from the stadium in Spokane. It was actually in Spokane Valley. I had no idea that Spokane Valley is a little bit rougher. And so it was called the Roadway Inn, which, I was like, I don't care. Like, it's just a night. We're not going to be there. We're going to get there in time to drop our bikes off and go to the game and come back and get up in the morning and leave. I don't like to eat breakfast with people in their pajamas anyway, so I don't care about the breakfast. I think hotel breakfasts are the most repulsive thing ever. Like, I don't even like to see my family in their pajamas, let alone a stranger. So we got to this place, and in hindsight, lots of bad ideas are in hindsight. In hindsight, when we pulled into the lot, it was like a Western movie, like when Clint Eastwood comes to town, and everyone like sticks their head out of the bar, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" It was just this whole scene. And the cultural moment, of course, was housing was at a crisis, and there was the stimulus money and all these different factors. In hindsight, it wasn't really a motel anymore. It was a low-income housing unit. So we get there, we walk into the lobby, I'm talking to this guy, he's very kind, but what I didn't pick up on is in 5 minutes' time, he had our entire itinerary for the rest of the time there. He's like, "Oh, what are you doing, and when are you leaving, and when are you going to get back, and your bikes, are they going in your room?" "Yeah, they're going in our room." And I didn't even pick up on it. My wife later told me she did, and my 3 boys, who are 10 times more courageous than me, they picked up on it right away, because every time we got eye contact, they're like, "Let's get out of here. Like, we cannot stay here." Seriously, like I'm the biggest wuss of the family, and they were the ones suddenly going like, "We can't stay here." I was like, we'll be fine. So then the guy said, "Well, I can't get you in the same building. There's 2 separate buildings, and oh, by the way, I can't even get you one of those motel rooms anyway." So that was kind of a fiasco, because the boys are in one room, we're in another room, and so he said, so they'll be in this building where we were standing. So he gives us the keys, and we're like, let's go check it out. So we go down the hallway, and I'm the whole time going, "This will be fine. It'll be fine. We're just sleeping here." And we opened the door, and the room was filthy. Like, I don't mean like stains on the carpet and like a kind of a nasty, skanky bedspread. I mean like chicken bones on the floor, and the bed was unmade. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we got to go find them and tell them they got to clean the room. So we go back to the counter and tell the guy, and he like picks up the phone and calls like, hey, Sally, I need you to come clean the room. She clearly lived there. So while we're waiting for her to go clean the room, we grab the other keys and we go, oh, let's go check out our room. And it was in the other building. We walked across the lot, left Chase at the corner of the expedition to guard the bikes because we've got more money in bikes than a car. Again, hindsight, we walk in and there's a guy at the laundromat. Again, who does their laundry at the hotel? But there's a guy I don't remember if they were boxers or shorts, but no other clothing. And as Teresa walked by, he asked her if she had any quarters. So, I mean, over and over, like all the warning signs were there. We got up to our room, and as we're walking down the hall, Lincoln pointed out that there was a rager happening in the room, like that we just passed. I mean, clearly it was full of people. And again, it was the like old Western, like people are looking out their doors as we walk by. We get into the room, and our room was good enough, so we kind of sit down, and I'm trying to read my wife, because I'm the one that pulls the ripcord on everything. So I'm trying to get a read on her, and she's just stone cold, like she's fine. So I'm like, she's fine, I'm fine. Don't trust your feelings, Adam. So we sit down in this room, and we kind of were like, okay, so what are we going to do? And the boys are like, let's get out of here. I'm like, no, we're going to go to the game. And so then, this just, to me, as I look back, this shows how bad it was. So we're like, okay, we got to bring our bikes in here. So we bring our bikes in, and again, everybody's staring at our bikes, and if you know the expensive bikes, I mean, you could hear the hubs from down the street, so we're wheeling these bikes in, and people are watching us wheel these bikes in. Then we got them in there, and we're like, okay, I think we need our locks. This is how bad it was. So we went back to the car, got all the locks that we used to lock it to the rack, and we tried to figure out, like, how can we lock these things to the furniture so that if they break into our room. And so we like wielded all these rocks around the desk and around the bed frame and everything we could to make it as big of a pain as we could. So then we're leaving, and again, nobody wants to be here, but I'm like, we're going to do this. And as we're walking out the door, I was the last one to close the door, and the tipping point for me was as I closed the door, I happened to look at the door frame, and there were pry marks like all up and down the door jamb. So we still went to the game. We parked in the back of the lot, and the boys were like, I can't believe we're doing this. We're never going to see our bikes again. We're going to die. I mean, all this. And it was the first time I got eyeball to eyeball with Teresa without the boys being there, and I was like, what do you think? And she's like, we've got to get out of here. So we went and stayed at the Motel 6, and it felt like the Hyatt. So I'm thinking about those kinds of bad ideas. Or while we're on it, and while we're just offending everybody with our music and our everything else this morning, I just thought this is the opportunity. Could we talk about one other bad idea? Men who go to the gym. Like, what is it about like 70 years old, something happens chemically in the brain that makes towels optional? Like, could we just agree it's a bad idea to walk from the shower to your locker with your towel in your hand? It is the dumbest idea. I had a friend who was telling me that, because I don't go to the locker room except for when I have to go to the bathroom, and it's like, I don't even know if I should wash my hands because it actually feels dangerous to wash your hands because guys shave naked. A friend was telling me he saw a guy a few weeks ago walking through the locker room completely naked with a mask on. I was telling my friend Hopkins that story this week, and he's like, you should have said to him, I'll show you where you need to put your mask. So we all have bad ideas, and if you were with us last week, we're in this series of Matthew, and we talked about this particular story where he feeds 4,000, then 5,000, and what is he doing, and why are there these consecutive stories? And you remember last week, we asked this question of like, what's the most powerful thing in the world? And just by way of review, we said, well, what if the most powerful thing in the world is a blank piece of paper? Like, what if the most powerful thing in the world is an idea? And I think what Matthew's doing, if you're following with us in this series, is there's a transition happening in the Gospel of Matthew where now what's happening is Jesus and Matthew are building towards, so what are the good ideas? I think that's what's happening in this story. I'd like to pray, and then we'll jump into it. God, to the extent that I'm seeing this accurately, the ideas that we get to explore this morning are quite literally, to the Orthodox Christian, the most important idea in the history of the world. And yet for many of us, we're so familiar with the idea, or so threatened by it, or just so confused by it that it's hard to sit with it. So my prayer would be that you'd show up this morning in ways unique to our circumstances and help us here. Amen. Ever heard of Roe v. Wade? Or did you know there's some people who think loving your neighbor is everybody should get vaccinated, and then there's other people who say, no, that's an individual choice. Do I have your attention yet? Like, this is that of the Bible, or at least it could be. And some of you are already aware of this, but what we just read is, in many ways, the center of Christian cultural debate for 2,000 years. Have you ever wondered, like, why did the West and the East divide? It's in this text. Have you ever wondered, like, what happened with Luther and the Catholics? It's in this text. What's with the Pope and his infallibility? It's in this text. What's with this idea of apostolic ascension? It's in this text. It's not my intention this morning to solve that riddle. I'm really intimidated by even talking about it, because when I sit with my Eastern Orthodox friend, Father Moses, and he talks about the way they read this, I go, well, that makes sense. I think I agree. And then when I sit with my friends who are really steeped in Catholic theology, especially people like David Casey, I go, well, that makes sense. I think I agree. And then when I sit in seminary classes from places where I've studied, I go, well, that makes sense. I think I agree. So my posture is to think that we can solve this one. I think it might just be unkind to the history of the human experience. Not that truth isn't important, but it just seems like it's more complicated than a 25-minute message. But here's my opinion. I actually don't think that's the fundamental emphasis of this text. I don't think what's going on there is this. I think what's going on there is Jesus is building towards, here's this idea, and it's a really important one. So let's just jump into that. Picking up in the latter part of chapter 16, it says this, now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Caesarea Philippi, let's talk about that. We've talked about it before, but Caesarea Philippi is a place. You can go visit it today. Some of us have been there. It's beautiful and dark and weird. It's in the northern part of what Jesus would have considered Israel. In Jesus' day, it was the headwaters of the Jordan River, so off to the left you can kind of see some caves, and in the middle you see some caves. There was an earthquake not long after Jesus' life that shifted the water flow, but the Jordan River, which is the source of life in this part of the world, it flowed from this place. Because of that, it was also a really important religious place. In fact, the city wasn't always called Caesarea Philippi, but it was once gifted to one of the Caesars, and so you get into the cultural politics of that day. What happened there was in all those little alcoves were shrines. And the god, don't put this image up yet, Holly, but the god that was worshipped there is the god Pan. Now, you may or may not be familiar with Pan, half goat, half human. Peter Pan Peter Pan does come from the god Pan because he was this youthful, kind of jovial, fun, kind of just perpetually young and irresponsible god. And the worship, well, I'm about to show you a statue that would have been in many households, and it's not my intent to get a reaction, but if we didn't offend you with Snoop Dogg, we might offend you here, and that's not my goal. But I think we have to sit with this idea of why did Jesus go to Caesarea Philippi? Because we read through it. But it would be like saying, and then Jesus went to the mosque. Or probably even more so, that's probably not the best example, then Jesus went to Vegas. Then he went to the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. Like, to go there and to go there out of his way is an incredibly bold statement. This picture, I think, captures what Pan worship was all about, and it's graphic. Go ahead to that next slide. If you're wondering, they're not wrestling. Maybe this next image will help you see what's going on there. That's Pan worship. This was a household, like you have your cross, they would have had something like this. So Jesus goes to this place where the center of worship was men in particular having sex with animals. And it's there that he asks these incredibly fundamental questions. And the question is why? Why does he go there to do this? And they said, having asked them, who do you say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now again, we can breeze through this, especially if you're familiar with the text. What stands out to me is the extent to which, like, I want Jesus to be like Mr. Rogers. Actually, I didn't ever like Mr. Rogers as a kid, but I want him to be that kind and nice and uncontroversial, don't you? If you slow down, there's lots of different types of prophets in Israel's history, but But John the Baptist, Jeremiah, Elijah, none of them are ever going to be confused with Mr. Rogers. Like, these are fiery, these are prophets who in particular loved to name like unjust government. They loved to name leaders who were out of line. These are prophets who John the Baptist got himself killed. This is one of Jesus' closest friends. So notice the impression Jesus is making isn't a like Jesus is my homeboy kind of impression. It's kind of a like, you're kind of a troublemaker. You're probably going to get yourself killed. Like you kind of say things that most people wouldn't want to say out loud. And by the way, the conversation that they're having right now, part of the reason, I don't think this is the primary one, but part of the reason why they're having it here is because how Peter answers that question, he would have known, Peter would have known, everybody would have known. If he answers it the wrong way, it makes them an enemy of the state. Like, this is like Stalin Russia kind of stuff. This is not innocuous, it's not lighthearted. This is heavy, heavy, big stuff. And he said to them, so he's still pressing the issue, but he said to them, but who do you say that I am? Matthew's been building towards something. If you've been following the narrative, maybe you can feel that, but he's been building towards who is this Jesus? This is the fulcrum point of the Gospel of Matthew. It's not the center numerically or within the word counts or even by our own chapter designations, but scholars seem to universally agree this is the fulcrum point of the Gospel. This is what it's working towards, and everything after this is working from this point. Who do you say that I am? Which brings us back to this idea of what's the most important idea in the world. Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. There's lots of nuance to these two titles. I'm choosing not to dig into them too deeply. I don't think that it's honest to say that Peter in this moment understands the Trinity and the triune nature of God. Scholars like N.T. Wright and myriad others go like we're asking too much of the moment to put that on here. But clearly, what is going on? Peter sees that something different is happening. Peter is being awakened to you're the one. You're not just in concert with these other guys. Like you're the guy. You're the leader. And all these words, Messiah and Son of the living God and Son of Man, they all would kind of capture this Jewish idea of you're the one we're waiting for. And Jesus says, and Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. What's going on here? Well, again, layer upon layer upon layer. Remember earlier in Matthew when we talked about there's three groups of people in Matthew's gospel? There's kind of three categorical responses to Jesus and what he's doing in the world. Maybe you remember, I think it was this summer, maybe it was in the fall. There's those who were closed. The religious people fell within that category. They decided, like, no, you're not God, you're not this person. There's the closed. Remember we talked about there's the amused. The crowds kind of make up this group. They're entertained. They're mentally stimulated. They kind of like the rah-rah and the show and the hype. And then there's what we call the open. Because what Jesus has made clear from the very beginning is it's going to require some paradigm shifting. It's going to require you to kind of get uncomfortable. This is going to take you places that you never imagined being. What does Jesus say when he says, flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven? One way is that this is a great apologetic for Calvinist Reformed theology that kind of argues for this idea that we don't really choose, God chooses us. I don't think that's actually the textual way to do it. Paul uses this exact same phrase in Galatians, and really what it's about is stewardship, in my opinion. It seems like what he's saying to Peter is, Peter, you've had all these opportunities along the way. And probably if we stopped and took inventory, you've had them, I've had them. There's been all these moments along the way, Peter, where you were given the chance. I would imagine if you were to talk in depth with someone who's recovered from some kind of addiction, don't you expect that they would say, like, there were all these roadblocks that I kept flying through. Finally, I responded to them. I sit with people in the context of marriage often, and oftentimes when it gets to that point, one person's going like, she said, or he said. There were all these instances, all these opportunities, all these kind of loud reminders, these invitations and opportunities, and I missed them all. It seems to me that part of what Jesus is doing here is he's affirming to Peter his stewardship. Like there's been these chances to stay open, and Peter, blessed are you because you've taken the chance. You've stepped into them. And I tell you, you are Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. There it is. Like there's the Roe v. Wade of the Bible. There's the current vaccine conversation. I mean, we could list over and over, like there's this incredibly seminal, important, theologically, historically important thing that I think we probably all should work through on some level. There's Jesus saying, hey, you're the guy. But here's a question. How many of you are named Peter? Anybody have the name Peter? Anybody have the middle name Peter? Man, that's astounding. Nobody. Well, like this room, nobody in Jesus' day was named Peter. It wasn't a name. It means rock. Question. Who else comes to mind, or what other instances in the Bible might come to mind when someone's name was changed? When was it and who were they? There's a guy named Abram and his wife Sarai. And you may remember that God did some significant things. He chartered a new covenant. And what did he do? He changed his name. He changed her name. There's this quote. Did I put that quote in there, or did I completely bomb on that? What's that? Is it in there? Oh, bummer. Dang, that's a fail on my part. It's on the mind map. If you pull back the layers of Jewish history, there's rabbis, and we don't know whether it was right before or right after Jesus, who talk about Abraham in similar ways, that God was looking to do something new in the world. He saw Abraham, or he saw Abram, and he said, he is the rock. He's the one upon which I want to build this thing I'm doing. But where I want to draw our attention is to this idea of Hades. It's often translated hell, but again, to whatever extent I have any credibility, my study and research would say hell's not the best translation, especially if we're trying to use it in ways that complement what was going on in Jesus' day. The better word is death. The headwaters of the Jordan River started at Caesarea Philippi. The belief was that if you could somehow crawl down that well, I guess it would be, or that spring, you would get to Hades, the realm of the dead, the underworld. Jesus says the gates of the dead, or death, will not prevail against what I'm doing. Why does he do that, and why in Caesarea Philippi? Here's why, in my opinion. A handful of years before this, quite literally, there was a sailor on his way to Italy, and as he was sailing for Italy, he heard a voice say, go tell them, in particular I think it was Plutarch, go tell them that Pan is dead. And so when he arrived in Italy, he started spreading the word, Pan is dead, Pan is dead. And by Jesus' day, the general treatment of Pan was he was the first Greek god in the history of Greek gods who ever died. Pan died. How many of you have ever heard of Pan worship before? Have you ever been to a Pan church? It's dead. What happened? Pan died. And Jesus marches his guys to that spot where, as we'll see next week, he starts his own conversation about death. And what does he say? Hey, we know Pan's dead. This movement's over. But guess what? What's death going to do to Jesus' movement? Where's the story headed? What's about to happen? Where's Jesus going? He's headed now for Jerusalem. What's going to happen there? I mean, this is everything about Lent and Easter, and I'm so excited for Easter Sunday because I think part of what COVID has challenged us to do is rethink our theology of death. Because Jesus and Easter is all about the deathless death. The early church wrote on their headstones, she's not dead. Why? Because Jesus said, not even death can end my movement. Slap yourself, pinch yourself. Even if you don't believe in Jesus, Like, you are actually a confirmation of what he said was accurate. The fact that you're in this room worshiping Jesus of Nazareth, not Pan, it connects with what Jesus is saying. They're going to kill me, and it won't stop my movement. What's going on here? What if what's going on here is on one level incredibly fundamental, and if we're not careful, eerily familiar, and yet quite literally the most important idea in the history of the world? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I got to hang out with my friend Hopkins this week just for like a day in classic Hopkins fashion in Sacramento. He flew me and my wife out there to hang out with I went to staff meeting. There were 350 people at the staff meeting. So their staff meeting is bigger than our Easter services. The speaker there is this kind of hot, new Protestant commodity, just brilliant, funny. And I knew Brian had told me that he also has Tourette's. He's from Vancouver, Canada. And so he said it's hilarious because sometimes he'll just start flipping the room off, but he's got Tourette's. Very funny guy. He was kind of the keynote speaker at this several-hour worship experience thing that we did. And at one point, I knew that he had Tourette's. At one point, he said, "I have OCD too." And that kind of got my attention. And then he said, and the way it used to manifest itself, he said, one time I was walking in an airport and I walked by this pillar, and he said I accidentally touched it once. And then I had this thought, you got to go back and touch that pillar again or else the airplane's going to crash. He said, and so he started telling stories like this. Well, for me, it was like the world stopped. Because, and I talked with, I was aware of this on some level, that I have similar tendencies, but I had no idea it was that bad things will happen, your family's going to die. I have this clear memory of being in middle school and trying to go to sleep, and it's like I touched the cover once, and there's everything for me is in fours. I'll still catch myself doing it, to do this, it drives me crazy. I got to touch it in fours. This isn't about me, but there was this moment of whoa. So I was telling Teresa about it afterwards, and in the airport, she said, "So what happened? Why did you stop doing that?" I don't have a clear answer other than there was this point in my late teens, early 20s where I just had to confront the fact, wait a minute, no. If Jesus is God, touching something 4 times, not 3, doesn't change outcomes. I only tell that story to go, that's how cataclysmic it can be. Some of you made that decision and you have your own, not OCD stories, but similar stories of you look back and there's this single moment in time. Some of you, it's a season. But as the band comes up here and ushers get ready for communion, I think the danger here is in our familiarity. We're always looking for what's personal, what can I do tomorrow, what changes? I'm not sure that's the point of this text. Maybe the point and value of this text is, who do you say that I am? And maybe in the coming moments as we celebrate through song and communion, for some of you, it's just the chance to bask in gratitude. God, you changed my life because I adopted this idea. And for others of you, if you're not following Jesus, we're so glad that you're here. And if you're trying to understand what it means to follow Jesus, it's this absurd. It's the belief that death didn't defeat Jesus, that the tomb was empty, and that we stand here right now because Jesus is God. So if you're not comfortable with communion, it's certainly not compulsory. You don't have to do that. You can just kind of take a pass. I get it. It's kind of hard, and you feel like you stand out, but trust me, nobody's judging you that way. I think there's also the chance to use this time not just to reflect on gratitude, but to reflect just what's the stuff? What's the stuff in your life that we might call sin that you need to invite God to be the boss in that area of your life as well?
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook or Instagram.